Hello, everyone. I'm Kristen, and I'm going to kick things off with a welcome to the second episode of Forthright series on cyber hygiene. I just want to remind everyone to feel free to use the chat for questions during the next 20 to 30 minutes. But before we jump into cybersecurity, I'd like to do a quick plug for our monthly newsletter. We're having a prize raffle for an Echo Pop. So all you have to do to enter the raffle is subscribe to our newsletter. There's a QR code you can scan, or there's a URL to use. I'm also going to put the URL in the chat. So I hope you will subscribe to our newsletter. And right now I'm going to turn it over to Steve and we can jump into cybersecurity.
Thanks, Kristen. Hello, everyone. I hope you guys are having a fantastic week. I'm Steve Zoberg, one of the founders at Forthright, and I'm really excited to kick off this new series focused on cyber-related topics. We're going to run these sessions twice a month. We're going to try to stay laser focused on one topic per session. And the first question, I think people are probably wondering, well, why are we doing this? Well, let's face it. We're all exposed to cyber threats every day. We often hear about breaches. And as professionals and as individuals, we're constantly looking to learn more about the various threats and different strategies that we can use to protect ourselves and the organizations that we work for. Now, I would imagine many of you already know this, right? You know that it's not an easy task. After all, that's why we're all here today, to learn more. Unfortunately, I'm going to be the bearer of bad news that there is no magic bullet to protect us. I wish there was. We have to stay vigilant. And because cyber threats, the strategies that bad actors use and what they're targeting, well, they continue to evolve. And the solution landscape continues to adapt, trailing just behind the current trends. So at the end of the day, it's become a complicated battle to keep your data and your identity safe. And this is why our general philosophy is, well, don't rely on tools alone. It's just not enough. Now, over the course of this series, we're going to show you why. We're going to also show you how Forthright helps our clients not only protect themselves, but also identify breaches as they're happening so they can be stopped in their tracks, even though the average breach isn't detected for over 200 days. That's like a startling statistic for me. That's a long time. That's a long time for a bad actor to be lurking around in your systems and have access to your data. And then on top of that, if you look at last year's statistics, the number of publicly recorded data breaches increased by 78%. This is why attending the cyber series is so important for all of us. So I hope you spread the word, invite more people. And all right, so how do we form a strategy, right? How do we form a strategy around addressing this threat? With those statistics, it shouldn't be a surprise that we're all being bombarded by tons of marketing around the latest tools and how they'll keep you safe. But again, we at Forthright, we believe that it starts with each of you and not on a single tool. We know this because we have decades of experience. We know this because Forthright meets with many clients each month, and through our various conversations, we learn about their real life challenges and even their breaches. And we know this from firsthand knowledge that we gain all about the strategies that were actually effective in the field. And just as important, the ones that weren't. So having a solid understanding of the current trends and their effective impact, it allows us to leverage modern security or cybersecurity frameworks to better protect ourselves and our communities. So at the end of the day, our goal here is to share what we've learned and what Forthright does to successfully protect our client ecosystem with all of you who attend. Now, I mentioned this last time, the FBI does its best to provide guidance based on their intelligence, and they have vast resources. And based on their consolidated data and analysis, they drive things like NIST protocols. However, NIST is not updated very often. As a matter of fact, it really hasn't been updated in years until very recently because the strategies that the bad actors are using and the fact that they're continuing to evolve to such a degree that the FBI actually released in February 2024 their updated NIST 2.0 protocols. And they were specifically designed to better define and align with today's threats. So for those of you who don't know what NIST stands for, that's the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and they have a core mission. And it is to help organizations better understand and improve their management of cybersecurity risks. So with that, let me pause for a minute. Kristen, let's take a quick poll for the audience and see if you guys are familiar with NIST or CIS.
Yes, the question is, do you currently, or are you, there's a typo there, sorry guys. Are you currently implementing any security framework like NIST or CIS?
All right, great. Well, so this brings me full circle to the goal at Forthright's cyber series. And that is, we want to share our knowledge, we want to share our wealth of experience, and we want to share real world examples with as many of you as possible. And we want to share how we can fight back and tilt the odds in your favor. So we've decided to use this forum as a way to drive thought leadership in our community, and to do so in quick fire style, so that way you can join us for twice a month, get in and out in 20 minutes or 30 minutes at most, and get back to your day. But each time you join us, you're learning something new. And at the very least, you're going to be able to check in on how your current strategies are going and how it compares to what other people are doing. So we definitely welcome and encourage questions. So please feel free to, at any point in time, ask them. You can hit us up in that chat box. You can also email us at success@forthright.com. And in future sessions, we're going to be adding guest speakers. We'll also be opening the floor for Q&A sessions. All of this with the same goal, and that is to provide information and action items that you can take to better understand and to improve your cybersecurity posture. Now, if you've missed the last episode, I encouraged everyone to go to success.forthright.com/cyber series, and you can click on the episode that you missed. And on the registration page, there's a link to the recording so you can rewatch it on demand. That way you don't have to miss something in case you can't meet us at the time that we're hosting this. And the last time we covered why cyber hygiene is important. And we did this with a fun history lesson, love that. Today, we're going to dig a little deeper and we're going to discuss what is cyber hygiene. And to take us on this journey, again, I'm going to introduce our awesome and entertaining host, who just so happens to be Forthright's Chief Information Security Officer, Heath Geeson. Heath, it's great to have you host these sessions. Tell us about the topic today and why you chose that topic for the next conversation in our series.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for the introduction. Welcome, everybody. And hopefully today we're going to go through some good information that'll be useful for you and your organization on your cybersecurity and compliance journey. And that leads to why we kind of picked this topic. I wanted to lay out a plan, or perhaps better words, a methodology to help everyone understand why they need to pay attention to how they secure their organization and how they measure that through compliance, and measure the compliance with those security standards they put in place. You know, security compliance is something that those of us on the inside of that business, we understand it. It's what we do. And it's hard sometimes for people to slow down and explain this to people who aren't living on the inside of the security and compliance world. Lots of times it's looked at as an overly complex and daunting task to put this in place. This results in people having fear and uncertainty and doubt, or as we call the acronym FUD, which paralyzes people. But this doesn't have to be something to fear. It can be done in small, manageable steps. And that's kind of the point and why we broke it down this way, to show people how you could take something that's big and seemingly daunting and break it down, remove that paralysis, and allow them to be able to start taking this on as something that helps their organization and moves operationally into a part of just the overall operations of the organization. Oftentimes, organizations don't think about this until they're acted upon by some outside entity. You know, for example, maybe you got to fill out a cyber insurance survey, and then, oh, look where we're at. We need to be better because this is going to cost us a fortune. Or maybe a client calls up and says, hey, we can't do business with you anymore unless you comply with this standard. Or the worst case scenarios, you know, some nefarious group says, hey, you can have your data back when you pay us millions of dollars. This all goes back to the old adage that you don't want to find yourself falling into of failing to plan is planning to fail, right? So we wanted to lay out this short series that addresses how to overcome that paralysis I was talking about, and shows how by doing this one step at a time, you can accomplish this without a huge undertaking. Today, in the last episode, we talked about and introduced why cyber hygiene is important and kind of led into what is it a little bit at a very high level. Today, I'm going to dig more into the main points of it and why we need to be doing this, right? Episode 3, we'll talk about steps to implement this, and episode 4, we'll cover how to make that a sustained program inside your environment. So essential cyber hygiene refers to the fundamental practices needed to maintain the safety and security of systems in an online environment. We're all in an online environment right now. It would be very rare if you have systems and that are completely air gapped and not touching the online environment. It's a part of how we work. It's intrinsic in the way that we work and do things nowadays. So essential cyber hygiene really addresses these 3 things, right? Risk reduction. Following these practices, you can significantly reduce your vulnerability to cyber threats. Trust building. A good program will build trust with customers, partners, stakeholders by demonstrating your commitment to this program, right? And cost savings. Now we're hitting home a little bit more. We all like to save money. Implementing preventative measures reduces the likelihood of costly incidents happening, like data breaches or system compromises, or like I mentioned in the previous slide, a client coming to you and saying, hey, you need to be compliant with this standard, right? So this is something I mentioned in the first part of the series, and you're going to hear me say this many times throughout the series, especially in the next 2 coming up, but I always want to touch on this. It's essential to remember that if you're going to embrace this and start implementing this is a program, not a project. A project has a specific start and an end. A project starts and then runs for a long period of time. A project focuses on delivering a specific outcome within a defined scope. A program steers a group of projects towards a long-term strategic goal. It's important to remember this, and you're going to hear me say this many times, so you'll know it's really important. Implementing cyber hygiene is a program, not a project. So what are the essential components of cyber hygiene, right? Well, let's break it down into these 4 main categories here. Asset management, you can't protect what you don't know you have. Vulnerability management, privilege management, and user education. So let's go into each one of these a little bit more here. So asset management, what is this? What is this meant by asset management in the context of cyber hygiene or security compliance? Well, it breaks down into these things, right? Hardware, these are your servers, your routers, firewalls, switches, other network devices you may have out there. I frequently say if it's on the network, that we need to know about it, need to know what it is and why it's there. So if you've got a coffee pot that's plugged into the network because it can be turned on remotely, then we need to know about it to make sure that it's being handled and secured properly, not causing risks to the rest of the systems on that network. Software, this is going to be your applications, your operating systems, and your security tools. You need to know about this, and you need to know what the company, what your organization supports and what it doesn't, and make sure you're only running the applications and systems out there that you have chosen to support. Data, this is hard in today's day and age. Data can live everywhere, anywhere, all at the same time, right? But this is talking about databases, your files, any information that you have out there. Do you have a way of categorizing what's sensitive information versus what's public information? Networks, this is a little bit of a nebulous term for most people who aren't in the IT security type business. And even then, we constantly argue about this. What does networks mean? Think about this as the system that connects all your devices within your office, the system that connects all your devices outside of your office, and then the systems that connect things in places like Azure or Amazon Web Services or any place that you might have infrastructure hosted out in the cloud. There's networks associated with all of those. Those are important to identify, catalog, understand the life cycle of them, so that you know, what is this our device? Where did this come from? Is this on one of our networks? And then security controls. This is going to be things like your access controls, your authentication mechanisms, How do people get authenticated into your system? Encryption keys. Encryption keys is something every company has several sets of them. Where are they stored? Who manages them? How are they tracked and make sure they're taken care of? At some level, you should already be doing some asset management. This usually comes from the financial need to track tangible assets like hardware, which is an easy one, right? For purposes of depreciation. This can be a good starting point for your cybersecurity asset tracking. In fact, when I'm frequently working with clients, one of the first things I do is talk to the finance team. Hardware assets always tie directly to a bill that was paid. If it wasn't, then maybe it's not your hardware, right? Most software assets do too. Data network security controls can get a little more nebulous, but they have to be paid for in some way or another. So finance usually is the team inside the organization that has the most knowledge about what we own, right? Now, the good news about this is there's many systems out there for tracking assets. Some are free, some are paid for. Pick one, start doing it. You may already have a system. If not, Excel works fine too. We'll talk more about that in the coming episodes. But remember, this is a program. So the most important step is starting. Once you start the program and start working through it, it will evolve and you'll get more mature and you'll find out more about the assets that you have in your organization. Doing nothing, you'll never know. Vulnerability management. This is important because you need to know your weak spots better than your adversaries, or at least as good as your adversaries, right? And you may not in the beginning, but you need to be working towards that as your goal. You need to conduct regular vulnerability scans on your systems. You can start with free tools, and then you can move up to higher level tools as you progress. Many organizations are compromised because they didn't remediate a known vulnerability. It's a very common way most people get compromised is, oh, look, they have never patched this. They've never put an update on that firewall, and it's susceptible to this type of attack. So be sure you have a good patch management process in place. Establish a regular update cadence for your network infrastructure devices. Plan ahead. Everyone can know, if you choose to, you can know when Microsoft is no longer going to support an operating system. There's no need for you to still be running a server or a computer with an operating system that's from 2012, 2008. All right, do I cringe when I see the ones that are from 2003, 21 years ago? Again, failing to plan means you are planning on failure. So I talk about this a lot with people, and I frequently will hear, well, our software doesn't run on the new operating system. Well, then it sounds like it's time for you to find a new software vendor. By the way, in most circumstances, if your software vendor requires you to have a server nowadays, you should probably already be looking for a new vendor. Don't get overwhelmed on this. Set priorities based on criticality, run your vulnerability scan, find your most critical vulnerabilities, then work through those and set your priorities. Again, this is a moving, evolving program, not a one-time project. So privilege management, what does this really mean? Well, this involves managing the access rights to your systems, your applications, your data. It focuses on limiting and monitoring who has elevated privileges, things like administrator rights. And what can they do with those privileges? And when can they do it? And should they have that privilege at that time? This all speaks back to enforcing the principle of least privilege. Everyone should always be operating with the least amount of privileges they need to do their job at that time. Organizations reduce the risk of unauthorized access and potential security breaches by doing this. Again, you probably already have some of these capabilities in your systems that you own today. They're just not being used. To bring this point around so people can understand it, I frequently will tell a story about, let's pretend I'm the manager at a bank and I have the keys to the bank vault. Now, do I leave those keys on the same keychain I use for my house and my truck? Let's say I go out one night and I have drinks and I lose my keys somewhere at a restaurant. Well, now the keys to the bank vault are lost. That shouldn't be the case. The bank vault keys should be secured back somewhere, safe and secure, and I should only have access to them when I need to have access to them. I shouldn't just be carrying them around. Yet, in our systems today, we'll go, oh, John Doe over there he's our systems administrator, so he always has administrator access. Well, he shouldn't. He should only have it when he needs it. There are ways that we can go and implement just-in-time administrative access, so it's only on when he needs it and it's not there when he doesn't. Again, probably a capability you have in a system you already own, just may not be using it. This brings us to user education. The biggest risk to your organization are the people in your organization. It is much easier for the bad guys to trick an employee into letting them in than it is for the bad guys to pick a lock and let themselves in, right? So how do we fix this problem? Well, it's through security awareness training and knowledge assessment. Remember, just because training has occurred does not mean learning has occurred. This is why knowledge assessment is such an important piece to all of this. Your security awareness program should include topics on all of these points that we have up here on the slide. Your knowledge assessment should include things like phishing tests. And I recommend people start with things like a phishing test. Establish that baseline. Testing people's knowledge prior to the training and test people's knowledge after the training. That helps establish a baseline as well. And I found it's also a really effective way for people to really absorb the knowledge, and they can see, wow, I didn't know about this stuff when I started, and now I do. Helps kind of set that knowledge into the brain where learning can actually occur instead of just training. So I'm going to leave you guys with this. Accomplishing all of those things usually is best done when you've got a methodology to follow or a framework. And if you're getting involved in this and you're trying to implement basic or essential cyber hygiene, the Center for Internet Security, or CIS, as you'll probably hear me say most of the time, has put together a set of critical security controls. They've broke these down into 3 different sections called implementation groups. The reason for that is there's a certain level of advanced stuff that needs in some organizations, but all organizations really need to be following at least the implementation group, or IG1, right? It covers these things I just explained to you in essential cyber hygiene, gives you a defense across most of your common attacks, and it focuses on keeping the business operational. So as you're building out your program, CIS is a great way for you to implement things. It speaks directly to the NIST framework that Steve was talking about earlier today. And I will be going more into this in our next episode. With that said, I'm going to hand you guys back to Steve. And I hope everyone has a great day. If you do have questions, please send them in. I'm always happy to talk about these topics.
Thanks, Heath. Thank you for another great session. I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and obviously thank you to Heath for sharing your time with us, your expertise and your perspective, which is always valuable and I find personally entertaining. Your style makes very serious and complex topics a little easier to digest and understand. I found it really interesting that you mentioned connected coffee pots. Because the amount of IoT devices are growing very fast throughout organizations and obviously in our homes. And most IT departments and us as individuals, we kind of ignore them because we don't manage them. They're not running Windows. We don't think about them. We're going to be addressing that in future episodes for sure, because IoT devices present a huge issue that we have to address and mitigate the potential threats there. We'll talk about that in the future. Great point. You covered a lot in today's content, and I'm sure there may be some people in our audience that want some help, or maybe they want to deep dive in one of these areas, or you want a private one-on-one call with us. That's totally okay. Feel free to reach out, send us a note at success@forthright.com. We'd be happy to schedule a one-on-one call with you. Before we break, I wanted to hit you guys up with one more poll that really helps us understand our audience and needs, and maybe you can help us. Give us some feedback. As you're doing this, I want to thank you for your feedback. I can't wait to learn more at our next session, which is just a few weeks away. It is going to be a good one. You don't want to miss the next section because we're going to talk about the actual steps required to implement cyber hygiene. And as a reminder, you can review our upcoming schedule, our topics, as we plan to discuss and replay these sessions just by going to success.forthright.com/cyber series. And we'd also love feedback. We'd like to understand any suggestions that you might have, if there's future topics you'd like to hear, or if you want us to go deeper in any topic in upcoming sessions. Feel free to, again, hit us up at success@forthright.com. Let us know. You can also drop a note in any of these chat sessions. We'd be happy to look through that. This is going to be a wrap for this episode for our cyber series. And as promised, we've done it in under 30 minutes. Looks like we are at 26 minutes. Make sure you're registered for our next session. It's only a few weeks away. Please feel free to invite your friends and colleagues. And with that, I wish you a great rest of your week. Stay vigilant, stay secure. Thanks for joining, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everyone.